Right. If you listen to Senator Scullion, you would think everything's okay in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs and that he's got the answers to everything. Well, he hasn't. And if he did, perhaps, you may get some more agreement across this chamber to the policies that he's proposing. When a government goes to a billionaire and lets them write the policy on how we should address Aboriginal unemployment, Aboriginal issues, you know that they're lacking in policy outcomes. This is the government that is currently preparing to do Australia over once again with the healthy welfare card because the billionaire had a thought bubble that it might be a good way to address Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander disadvantage. While they are doing policies like that, you will not be getting cross-party support for those policies. When you do cut funding, and let's look at the funding that's been cut from youth services in Central Australia, which points to the chaotic nature of what has just gone down with the Indigenous Advancement Strategy. Now, we know that many groups have missed out on funding because they're ringing us. As yet, we don't have an overall picture because that information isn't available. We are at the moment having, unfortunately, to operate on anecdotal evidence. There is some list circulating around Australia for the Northern Territory and WA. They don't tell us what projects haven't been funded. They do tell us the projects that have been funded, and by electorate, by the way, but they don't tell us how much they are funding. They don't tell us which organisations have replaced other organisations. So we can't get a picture about how the so-called brilliant strategy, or the strategy for Indigenous advancement, has in fact been funded. What the overall strategy is seems to have been a bit of a collection of what people feel should be funded, and they actually don't have an idea of what has been funded. And that's clear from the picture from Central Australia, where the youth services for both Macdonald Shire and Barkly Shire have not been funded. So the Sport and Rec program in Barkly Shire, which I'm told employs about 30 Aboriginal people, hasn't been funded. And for the Macdonald Shire, there's very important areas that have been affected by petrol sniffing that have, through the past funding programs, funded youth services for important areas that have been subject to both petrol sniffing and other substance abuse. The Barkly Shire has apparently been offered 8% more in funding to fund a whole lot more areas. In other words, things they're not, sorry, that's the Macdonald Shire, things that they will not be able to do with just an 8% increase in funding. We don't know what has or hasn't been funded under the Indigenous Advancement Strategy. We also know that some organisations didn't put in funding bids because they didn't think they would be able to meet the guidelines in time. We know that other organisations did, and in fact didn't have, because of the rapidity with which they had to put in applications, they weren't able to do it up to the satisfactory standard, and they seem to have been assisted to improve those applications. Again, makes a farce of the process. The Minister in estimates and the Department in estimates a couple of cycles ago admitted that in fact the funding that had been cut, there wasn't a strategic approach to that, it was an efficiency drive to cut funding. There has been funding cuts to this program, and instead of the Minister actually addressing the issues around the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, what does he go? To the same boring, used and trite remarks about debt. The same old, whenever the government minister doesn't want to answer a question in this place, they go to that point, and that's what he did just then. I actually expected him to be better than that and to actually address the issues. I understand that the department probably didn't want to make a mistake on not funding those youth services that are absolutely critical in Central Australia, absolutely critical to addressing the issues around substance abuse. But that's what happened. Those applications were put in. They have fallen through the gap in terms of getting addressed by government, which again makes a mockery of their claims that they have been through a strategic approach for this Indigenous advancement strategy. They have not. And I resent him coming in here and lecturing us about what we should be doing and just supporting them blindly.